Strategic Wealth Advisors South Florida offices, call Lee Berlin at Strategic Wealth Advisors at 954-649-6248. Again, that's 954-649-6248. Radio listeners who call will receive a copy of The Financial Fortress and free access to the newsletter. We invite you to call. And of course, join us next time for more Smart Money. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
If an individual student athlete or team wins a high school state championship, it's an amazing thing.
And it goes in! It goes in!
It's also just the icing on the cake. That's because young people in Florida who participate in education-based athletics are already winners. Studies show that win or lose, participation helps to impart skills they can use to enjoy greater success in other areas of their lives. School sports teach the benefits of teamwork, the value of self-motivation, and the importance of accountability. They also help to foster stronger work habits and higher levels of self-esteem. In other words, the true value of school sports can't be measured in terms of wins or losses. If an individual or team goes to state, it's an incredible accomplishment. But regardless of the outcome, today's student athletes are already destined to go far. School sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the Florida High School Athletic Association and the Florida Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
Owning your own business is one of the most rewarding things you'll ever do. But it certainly isn't easy. For nearly 50 years, business owners have been getting the help they need from SCORE, all for free.
My SCORE mentor helped me take the first step.
He helped me create a business plan and helped me implement it.
Whether you're a startup or an existing business, SCORE mentors can help you achieve your business goals.
SCORE helped me to make the unimaginable possible.
Visit score.org to get started today.
Talk 1470, WWNN Pompano Beach, Boca Raton, Miami, Fort Lauderdale.
AM 1470 with even more information you can use. Are you suffering with chronic pain? Tune in for No Bones About It with Dr. Alvin Stein. You'll learn non-invasive techniques that can help you get rid of your pain without the use of harmful drugs or surgery. That's No Bones About It with Dr. Alvin Stein. Tuesday mornings at 11, right here on AM 1470 WNN, South Florida's Health and Wealth Network.
Talk health, talk wealth, talk politics. Talk 1470, WNN.
If you suffer from excruciating back pain and sciatica, pay careful attention. According to a study in the medical journal Spine, back surgeries to alleviate pain frequently backfire, leaving patients in more pain than before the surgery. A second study from the University of Cincinnati's College of Medicine provides clear evidence that 74% of surgeries for the back fail. But there is a solution and an end to your suffering. Dr. Fernando Ranella, he's a medical doctor and the founder of the Center for Back Pain Management, where he specializes in the elimination of back pain and sciatica quickly, easily, without surgery or any pain medication whatsoever. Dr. Ranella accepts Medicare and most insurance. He has a location in Delray and one in Fort Lauderdale. Call 561-819-6325. That's 561-819-6325.
This is Talk 1470.
Talk 1470.
WNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. The content of the following program, including all statements from the hosts and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by the host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program shall not be viewed as substitute for a personal consultation with an attorney. Now, prepare yourself to be informed and entertained by Gus Bravo and Neil Consi, two AV-rated trial lawyers who have been practicing law for a combined total of nearly 40 years. For the next 30 minutes, they will share their insight and commentary on important legal issues affecting all of us.
A lawyer is driving down a city street with his arm hanging out the window as he's driving, and All of a sudden, another car comes so close, it swipes his car, causes damage to it, and actually cuts his arm off from below the elbow.
Oof.
Lawyer gets out of the car furious. He runs to the other driver and he says, "Look what you've done. This is my brand new Porsche. You've just scratched it. It's going to cost thousands of dollars. The hood is dented." And the other guy looks at him and says, "You lawyers are so materialistic. Here you are yelling at me about your Porsche when your arm has been amputated." And the lawyer looks down and he says, "Oh my God, my Rolex." Good evening. Welcome to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. I'm Neil Codsey, and with me is Gus Bravo.
You did it again. You're supposed to let me introduce myself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It completely throws me off. I was completely thrown off last show. So anyways.
So that's your excuse as to why you were thrown off last show?
Absolutely. Okay. That's what I'm sticking with.
We'll stick with it.
Well, thank you for that joke. Actually, I like that one. I know you have a whole treasure trove of jokes. So, welcome again to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. Today's topic is lawyer confessional, what lawyers don't tell clients. But before we jump into the topic, I just wanted to sort of change things a bit and talk about some current events.
Okay.
So I got this from a website called Legally Weird. It's actually a fine law blog. And so it's interesting legal stories. So this one is, the title is Florida 8th grader pranks teacher charged with cybercrime. Apparently, in Tampa, an 8th grader was charged with a felony for logging into a teacher's computer and then changing the background image to two men kissing.
Okay.
And so the kid said he didn't like the teacher, so he tried to put inappropriate pictures on the computer to annoy him. Well, mission accomplished. Unfortunately for the kid, he was arrested, charged with a computer felony, suspended from school for 10 days, could face 5 years of jail time and $5,000 in fines.
For doing what? For just logging onto the computer?
Cybercrime is very serious stuff. I mean, I guess what happened to the old days when we just give them a rotten apple or throw some papers at them.
In War Games with Matthew Broderick, he broke into a defense contractor and he ends up saving the day. No crimes there.
That's just
and you've got a kid. That's well,
I understand. So here's the other story, the second story.
Okay.
Its subject is gropey TSA agents fired. So apparently at Denver International Airport, a couple of TSA agents, one a male and a female, had this little game going on that whenever they would see an attractive male passenger, the female TS agent would mark on the computer, then the scanning computer, that it was a female that was about to be scanned. So when the male passenger would walk through the scanner, obviously the scanning machine would indicate an anomaly in the genital area, and so it would force the male scanner to then give a separate, more in-depth pat-down. Eventually they got caught, and so next time you're going through the airport.
Now, why did I know that joke? I was going to throw that one back at you before, but you got me.
All right, so let's jump on topic now. Today's topic is lawyer confessional, what lawyers don't tell clients. I know we put a list of things that this is what lawyers would want to tell their clients if they had the courage to do so.
Right. Some of these will be confessionals for Gus and myself.
Never.
Things that we really don't like to tell clients, and others will be other lawyers we've worked with that we share maybe, but other lawyers will hold back. Right. So it's kind of going to be an interesting
first
mix.
On the list is I don't know the answer without doing research.
Well, yeah, and that's lawyers. I think we even mentioned that on our first show or maybe our second show, about how lawyers, a lot of clients don't understand why a lawyer would need to research something. And we talked about how the law is really rarely black and white. It's typically gray. And so even if you've been practicing 25, 30, 40, 45 years, you still have books you have to go to. There are things you have to look up because every case is decided on its own facts.
It reminds me of the scene from Spies Like Us when they're about to do the operation. And they take the book.
The next step in this operation is flip. Shave the patient.
So the idea is, look, I mean, most lawyers have experience with all the different areas, but there are times that a client walks into our office and we just don't have a specific experience with that particular matter. Doesn't mean we're not able to handle it. Doesn't mean we don't know what we're doing. It just means that we're going to have to open up a book and look at it. Because after all, in law school, they teach you how to think like a lawyer.
It's the same example. I mean, I was in a meeting this morning. I do a lot of labor and employment law. It's one of my areas. And I was asked to help devise an employee handbook for a charter school here in South Florida. And so I'm sitting, before going to that meeting, I've done employee handbooks for factories, for hospitals, for all sorts of other environments. I've never done one for a charter school. So I wanted to make sure that charter schools weren't under some specific regulations with things they'd need to put in their handbook. And that's a perfect example, I think, because although 99% of it, there's always that 1% that you want to go back and look up.
Exactly, because again, in law school, it's exactly why they teach you how to think like a lawyer. Teach you how to think like a lawyer because they can't possibly teach you all the law because the law is constantly changing. So the idea is we spot the issues, we look at the law, we do some research, and then we come up with the answer. But no lawyer is going to confess to that initially. You'll ask them, do you have experience with this? Yeah, I do for the most part. But the reality is there may be some areas where we've never done before, and there's always a first time for everything.
Right. So that's something that lawyers tend to be afraid to share. But in reality, if understanding sophisticated client understands that that's something that has to be done.
Right. Number 2 on the list, actually, this one is a slide. So for those of you who are actually watching us online, hello, we have a slide coming up, slide 1, hopefully.
Gus is our resident artist, so if you like the slide, I helped him with it. If you don't like the slide, he did it by himself.
Okay, this is slide number 1. We aptly titled this one, The Google School of Law. Right. So we've all had clients who have either themselves or have had family members graduate from the Google School of Law.
Right.
You can elaborate what we mean by that.
Yes, and unlike Gus, I started practicing law before there was a Google School of Law. So people weren't able.
Internet.
Right. Well, there was no internet until Al Gore actually finally got around to inventing it. But when I was practicing, initially. Back in the early 1990s, I think we had a lot less of this. We had a lot fewer clients trying to tell us what we needed to do, unless they had a relative who was a lawyer.
Right.
They'd have a relative who did wills, trusts, and estates and would try to advise us on how to try a labor and employment case because their cousin, the wills and estates lawyer, said he'd do it this way. Now, everybody, you don't need the cousin who's a lawyer. You just log into Google and look up the law.
Did you say log into Google? You actually click on the.
You know what I meant.
So you go on Google.
That worldwide interweb thing.
Exactly. And so they'll type up. Literally, we'll type up. How to win a contract case or how to do this. And so, look, Google can be a wonderful search tool. Obviously, search function. It gives you a lot of information. The problem is it gives you a lot of information. So inevitably, we have clients who say, well, I went on there and I did some research, and what about this doctrine, or what about this case, or I have a friend who told me this is all you need to do. And the problem with that is, again, it's a lot of information. A lot of it is outdated.
Well, it's outdated, and it applies to the universe. In other words, I had a client the other day, I was doing a motion for him, and I get this strange email. Well, I'm working on this motion. I assume you're going to comply with Rule 74, which requires you to do X, Y, and Z when filing a motion with this particular court. It's a strange email, and I'm like, wow.
Florida doesn't have a Rule 74.
Exactly. So I'm thinking, what in the world is he talking about? So I get on Google. There's a Rule 74, which contained exactly what he was talking about, except for it was in Texas. So I very politely said, Florida doesn't have a Rule 74. Right. You might be talking about Rule 74 in Texas, but we don't have to concern ourselves.
And a lot of times what clients don't realize is that can be counterproductive, because then you have to spend time trying to do the research, figure out what the heck he or she is talking about when it comes to that area and topic, and then obviously trying to correct them in a very polite way.
Absolutely.
So lawyers are not going to want to tell you, listen, just because you graduated from the Google School of Law, I appreciate your input, but thanks but no thanks. But again, to quote Lincoln, a lawyer's stock is in his trade is his time, right?
Well, and it's the same thing I'm sure our doctor friends go through with all these commercials for pharmaceuticals on TV. When people watch a commercial and they say, oh, wow, that's some medication maybe I should be taking. It's one thing to self-diagnose yourself and go to your doctor and ask, I saw this commercial, is this something you should consider? And just have that conversation.
Right.
It's another to say, wait, I found this law here. It doesn't look like you're following it. So we seem to get more clients are a little more confrontational with lawyers.
Yeah,
I think.
it's more direct, and they pull out with some information.
Right.
Okay, the next one is number 3. I don't believe you. And this actually, I'm the one that put this in there. So I'll take full credit and the blame for it.
Well, it's just because you hear it so often from your wife that.
Oh, okay. I'm going to punt on that one. We'll move on. Right. Actually, he's thinking it's the wrong slide, but it's not that one just yet. We'll get to that one. Right now, it's I don't believe you. We'll jump to that slide number 2 in a little bit. I don't believe you is, I'm sorry, but ultimately, we have clients come into our office and they're telling us a story that just sounds too good to be true, right? And they just don't come across as trustworthy. There's just too many holes in their story. And at the end of the day, look, if we're gonna take on the case, I mean, it's a lot of these cases come down to one person's word versus the other. You'd hope there's emails and letters, but ultimately it's who the jury is going to believe.
Right. I accidentally shot my wife in the back twice. So which actually brings an interesting distinction, because you and I were talking about this earlier. That shooting your wife in the back, hopefully no one does that. But the issue there is criminal law. And in criminal law, a criminal defendant has the right to be defended.
Right.
The state has to prove its case. So even if your client doesn't have a good case, you've got to force the state to prove it. And there are times when you plea bargain, et cetera.
The constitutional safeguards in there that you want to make sure that everyone is given their fair day in court.
Civilly, you're not entitled to a day in court if you don't have a case. If you get in a car accident and both drivers are speeding and you're both at fault, a good lawyer is going to maybe advise you on those facts that it's just not a case worth pursuing because it's not one you can win.
Right, and not only maybe factually the case is not, it's not a good one, but more importantly, and what I meant by this one is, look, if the person just doesn't seem trustworthy, if I don't think they're trustworthy, then certainly the juror or the judge is going to have the same issue. So this is one of those things that no one's going to come out and want to say that, but that's what we're thinking.
Right.
We're coming up on the break now, but the second half of our show, we'll talk about more things that lawyers don't want to tell their clients.
All right.
Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil is being brought to you by the law offices of Neil D. Codsey and Bravo Law. Bravo Law is a business litigation firm known for providing common sense solutions to small businesses and individuals throughout South Florida. Mr. Bravo is rated AV by Martindale Hubble and Superb by AVVO, the highest ratings available from these two entities. The law offices of Neil D. Codsey is a litigation boutique with offices in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. Mr. Codsey is a veteran trial lawyer with nearly 25 years of jury trial experience. He is also a 2-time recipient of the South Florida Daily Business Review's Most Effective Lawyer Award, a recipient of numerous awards for providing pro bono legal services, and has been recognized by the National Law Council. Call our office, 786-464-0841 or 954-790-6711 and get informed. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. If you have a comment, question, or just want to contribute to the conversation, call the show at 888-565-1470 and share your thoughts on what's going on. Now, back to Gus and Neil for more Attorney Confidential.
And we're back with Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. I should say starring Gus and co-hosted by Neil.
Which is when you were a guest on the Jeff Van Treese show, you didn't think I'd be listening, but that's exactly what you said to our good friend Jeff. I was the one. That's not fair to Jeff. Jeff has a great show.
No, it was because I was on there.
Right,
that's why
that's true.
I brought down his following.
I mean, he's had some good guests, and we'll plug him right now. Jeff's show is on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock. Legal Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese. I don't know who his guest is tomorrow, but I'm sure it's somebody very interesting, and y'all should listen in.
Good.
Y'all, my Southern came out.
So, first half of the show, we're talking about what lawyers don't tell clients, lawyer confessional. We'll jump into the next slide. Now we can jump into the next slide, which is slide number 2. It's now this picture, for those of you who are listening on the radio, this is actually it's titled "The Village Lawyer," And I picked it because there's just so much detail here as far as you can see.
Right.
There's a picture of a lawyer, all the paperwork, and all the different people at the lawyer's office. You see how busy it is.
And if my wife can see this, she says, that's what my desk looks like now.
Organized chaos.
Yeah.
And I think this gets us to our fourth and fifth topics, which is don't pay me, don't hire me yet, and also hourly rates and our fees, which I think are kind of all related.
Well, no lawyer's ever going to say, don't pay me.
Don't pay me
Don't
yet.
pay me yet.
Don't pay me yet.
You left out the most critical word of that sentence is
right.
don't pay me yet.
You're
No,
right.
lawyer, don't pay me. But no, there are times when we all get phone calls and it's premature to hire a lawyer. I'll give the labor and employment context again. Somebody's got a complaint. They can go to the EEOC and fill out a charge form, and the EEOC will investigate that complaint. If you hire a lawyer, you're going to pay a fee, a percentage. Let the EEOC run its course, and I tell people if they don't satisfy you, then you can retain a lawyer. But if you retain a lawyer now, you're paying a percentage.
Yeah, I had a similar example. Different area, obviously. Mine was more commercial nature. I have a client that had an agreement that he wanted to have translated to Spanish. And so I said, look, don't hire me to do that. I'm going to charge you far too much an hour to do the translation. Why don't we find someone who's going to do it much cheaper, does the translation, and then I'll come in and when the final review, make sure that the terms comport with one another. That's just an example of, look, you don't need a lawyer for everything, and certainly the lawyers should be willing to tell their clients, don't pay me yet, don't hire me yet, do all these steps first.
Right, and this is an example, as I mentioned earlier in the show, of what Gus and I do, and a lot of lawyers do, but there are a lot out there that don't. So when you're hiring a lawyer, one of the things you should ask that lawyer is this something I can do myself? Do I need you for this?
Right.
And if so, why?
Right.
What are you going to charge me? If I did it myself, what are the risks? And those should be in your vocabulary anytime you retain a lawyer, because an honest lawyer, and there are a lot of us, we joke about it, but there are a lot of good, solid, honest lawyers will tell you there are times...
Or one in this room.
Right.
Take a pic.
Well, you shouldn't be so hard on yourself. But we'll tell you that this is a time where here's what you can do. And you give a free tutorial for a 10-minute phone conversation. Here are the hoops you need to jump through. Right. And if you don't feel comfortable jumping through, we're not, as lawyers, trying to punt you away. We're not trying to kick you away. We're trying to give you advice to save you money and time.
Well, because like I tell folks, look, we are in the relationship business, right? I mean, and it's a client service. We don't sell a product. We sell our time. We sell our counsel. And so if I may get in and get some money out of you for doing something you didn't need me, over time you're going to realize that. You're going to realize that, especially when you come across someone who's ethical and he's doing the right way, you're going to realize that, I got taken for a ride by this other person. And it doesn't matter who. No one likes to overpay, which gets me to, I think, our next point, one, the hourly rates and fees. I always joke, look, I tend to be, ask my wife, I'm very stingy, cheap, or whatever you want to look at it. And so this weekend I spent 4 hours working on our garden. I picked Sunday, which was record-breaking heat, because I was just too cheap to pay someone to do it. And so sometimes I catch myself when I'm quoting clients, $350, $400 an hour. I think to myself, wow, I can't imagine paying me for that amount of money. And so I know sometimes we have that little thought going in our minds, thinking that's just a lot of money that we're charging people for.
It's the old adage that you find that gas station that's 10 cents a gallon less, but you have to drive 20 miles to get to it, and some people will actually make that decision to say it doesn't work out.
Right.
At that point, you've guzzled more gas to get there. But yeah, sometimes it's the penny wise and pound foolish. But a lot of times, I don't think people realize that lawyers' rates are negotiable. Now, you don't want to go around and ask 10 lawyers what their rates are and then try to get them to nickel and dime, literally, okay, you're $350 an hour, will you do it for $340? Well, you won't. I'll find somebody else at $335, and back and forth.
We talked about that before. Don't go by the mistakes last week. Don't just go by the hourly rate.
Exactly.
But by that same token, understand that, like Neil said, the rates are negotiable. A lot of lawyers make simply the basis for the rate has nothing to do with just from the business perspective. What the overhead is and what your profit margin is, rather what the market could bear.
Right, and I would, instead of saying they are negotiable, I would say they can be. I mean, there are going to be times when a lawyer recognizes that you're maybe a client of lesser means and goes ahead and offers you that discount rate initially. So they might not be willing to come down any lower, but you should always try.
Sure.
And you're not going to offend a lawyer by asking.
No, and we're business people. I mean, it's just like anything. There's a time to bargain, and if we don't feel comfortable coming down off that number, we won't.
And I would suggest too, because we are focusing a lot on rates, is if you're going to bargain with a lawyer, it's not about the hourly rate. It really is about the budget. I would, if I were to hire a lawyer, I would be less inclined to ask them to discount their rate and more inclined to, when they're going to engage in a larger project, like they're going to draft a summary judgment brief, which takes tens of hours.
Right.
Ask them to flat fee. Would you consider, you're estimating that this is going to be a $20,000 brief. Can you cap it at 20? Or can you do it for 18, as opposed to asking them to bring down their rate $25 an hour? Because in the long run, it's those projects when you're in litigation. If they're drafting a will for you, you should just get a flat fee anyway, hopefully, if they have to do some research. But that's the better way to bargain. And the contingency one, a lot of lawyers don't talk about. And this is something very few lawyers will, and our lawyer friends will not be happy with us right now. But the standard in Florida is if you have a personal injury or other type of matter that a lawyer is going to take on a contingency. In other words, they only get paid if they win for you.
Right.
You're not paying them a fee. That's a contingency relationship. The standard in Florida is the lawyer gets 33.33% pre-lawsuit, and the lawyer gets 40% after a lawsuit is filed.
Right. So when you go to the one of these fancy billboards or fancy commercials you get,
right,
they're not giving you a better number than anybody else.
Right.
is.
But here's the issue. And these are not typically negotiable. Most lawyers really stick to their guns. But I will tell you that if you have a very serious case in which someone was killed, or where the damages are in excess of $1 million, and everybody's telling you that, and its liability is not in question, a speeding driver working for a multi-million-dollar corporation just ran a red light and killed 2 of your family members. Liability is not an issue, maybe millions of dollars in damages. That case probably settles early. You might find a lawyer willing to take that at 20% or 25%.
Absolutely, yeah. Those are all things that I think it's good to know because they are negotiable, and I think it's, well, your point is put your money where your mouth is.
Absolutely.
Right? The other thing that I had, because we're kind of running out of our time here, is the 80-20 rule. A question that I know I personally ask myself whenever I meet with a client: are you going to be part of my 80 or are you going to be part of my 20?
Right.
And what I mean by that is, I don't know, someone must have done the math at some point and they realized that 20% of the clients will take up 80% of your time. And so the objective that most lawyers have when we're meeting with a client for the first time is trying to decide, are you going to be part of my 80 who, pays when they're asked to be paid, and doesn't really, it stays on top of the stuff, but again, they let you drive that train or captain that ship, or are you going to be part of the 20? Are you going to be are you a recent graduate of the Google School of Law? Are you going to be constantly sending me information about things I should do with the case and arguments you think I should make, and so I think that's a point that
Absolutely.
I think it's worth making.
Yeah, I mean, that's an issue that the lawyers are always going through because the problem clients sometimes aren't worth it.
And it's time. Again, it's the time component to it.
Right.
It just becomes taxing on their time, and it again becomes counterproductive because the more time I have to spend addressing your questions, it's the less time I have to devote my time on your cases.
Right.
And also, by the way, you're not our only client. That's something maybe we should add it to the list.
Right.
You're not my only client.
If you're going to a lawyer and you're their only client, that's a whole separate problem.
That reminds me of a quick story. We have about 4 minutes left. So I think
okay, I'll let you tell a story. You have my permission.
When we have a rule now with my family, 2 minutes actually.
So
I'll make a real quick story. We have a rule in my family that we never go to a restaurant where we see it's empty. Because we did that a couple years ago and we got the absolute worst food, worst service around. So when it's busy, we'll wait.
Right.
When it's empty, don't. And that's the same thing with lawyers. If you don't have too many clients, it's a warning sign. I want to get to the last slide, which is why don't you apologize? Slide 3. Make it really quick. This is more about a lot of litigation, a lot of cases can be avoided just with an apology, right? I mean, sometimes just tell the client or prospective client, pick up the phone.
How many times have we heard someone say, I wouldn't even be suing them if they just apologized?
Right.
And I know you've got a case involving a funeral where they screwed up you had one. And if they had just apologized for what they did,
right,
it wouldn't have even filed a lawsuit.
The slide we have up now is a letter from Rupert Murdoch, which is, we are sorry for that News of the World fiasco. Obviously, that didn't work well because the newspaper ended up shutting down.
Right.
But I think the point of it is, look, apologize. Sometimes, even if he doesn't avoid the litigation, I think it's the right thing to do, and you'd be surprised how effective that could be.
Right.
All right.
The music's here.
We're coming down to our end of the show. 10-second takeaway, Neil, before we wrap up.
10-second takeaway is there are certain things lawyers don't tell you. Those are the things that you should force out of them in some ways. You should ask lawyers questions about rate reductions, about all the things we've talked about that lawyers hesitate to share with their clients. And that's what we're trying to get to you today.
Can you put up the last slide? And we have our closing remarks, our deep thought of the day, which is slide number 4. And this came from Dr. Seuss, who actually said, be who you are and say what you feel, because those who don't mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind.
And on that note, we will end tonight's show. Thank you for listening.
Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
You have been listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, 2 rated AV trial attorneys with over 40 years of experience. Tune in next week for another episode of entertainment, insight, and just plain fun. That's Monday, 6 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM. See you next Monday for more Attorney Confidential. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.